Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Lou. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us from the other end of the world and, in a very different time zone. We always say we have like this running joke on the show whenever we have a guest that's from the other side of the world. We're like, we're from the future. Hello, how are you there? The future is great, by the way.
Great. Good to hear it.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm really excited to talk to you today because, when we found out about your book, I was just talking to my team and I was just saying, this is such an amazing idea. Why have not we heard about it before? And today we really want to talk to you about all things happiness, gratitude, and of course, a big portion of it we want to dedicate to your book and the insights you found in the book. And I would love to let the guests speak for themselves because, there's no one that's going to introduce you better than yourself. So it'll be really great if you could share a little bit about your professional background and why you've decided to join us today.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. As soon as I saw the title of the show, I was like, well, we'll have things to talk about. We'll fill our time. So my name is Nancy Davis Kho. I'm in Oakland, California, where the Warriors recently won their fourth NBA championship, but we're not gloating about it too much. And I wrote a book called The Thank You Project, Cultivating Happiness, One Letter of Gratitude at a Time. And I really stumbled into this. I have to say, I spent the first 15 years of my career working in business and in corporate work and decided at around age 40, you know what? I think I'd rather be a writer. And it was really kind of out of nowhere. But then I started doing that. And the book that was waiting for me to write it was this book, The Thank You Project. It took me a while to get there. The book came out in 2019. But it was all about a year I spent writing one thank you letter every week to someone who had helped, shaped, or inspired me in some way. And the writing the letters and the impact they had on my life surprised me. It surprised me when I got a book deal. I'm surprised that I'm still talking about it 3 years later. But I think having a book like this come out right before the pandemic started, it was hard in some ways. I had hoped to be out on the road a lot more talking about it. But I was also glad that people had access to it during a time where it was easy to feel hopeless and it was hard to feel happy. Because I do think that some of the stuff that I discovered through writing my letters is a very powerful way to build resilience, and the end result is happiness. How you get there is actually very, the links between gratitude and happiness are fascinating to me. So I know we're going to talk about that, and that's kind of how I got to where I am. The other thing I'll mention is that I too am a podcaster. Lou was very excited to see me pull out my mic and headphones at the start of this interview. I started a podcast in 2017 called the Midlife Mixtape podcast, and it's all about the years between being hip and breaking one. So if you don't laugh at that tagline, you are not going to enjoy that show. But I did it I actually ended the show. I sunset it in December last year, but I talked to people in midlife about the things they like about being in their 40s and 50s, because I was experiencing it as not entirely positive all the time, every day, but there were so many great things about being the age I am. And I think younger people, I wish millennials, and I hope someday Gen Z will listen to the wisdom that people have, because I think so many people dread aging, and it's nothing to dread. There's so many cool things about being older, wiser, and caring less about what other people think. And that's what I just tried to bring out in my interviews, is just finding really cool people from all walks of life and hearing about how they were thriving and doing amazing things, well into their 40s and 50s and beyond.
Yeah. Wow, that's definitely something that we don't hear very often on the show.
I know. I
So,
mean, it's
yeah,
like
that
the
is
secret. It's like people who live in
yeah.
Seattle, Washington that tell you it rains all the time. It doesn't rain all the time up there, but they don't want you to move there because it's beautiful and they don't want to have to compete for parking. So,
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point you made there. And, thank you for sharing your story with us. I think stories really shape who we are and, understanding where you're coming from. And we're going to talk about gratitude and your book. I think it's going to be just great to also know that you've also done another podcast project yourself. And yeah, I'm sure you know exactly what the audience wants to hear or, what would benefit the audience. So we're really excited to talk to you today. And we always start the show by defining the topic first. Before we go into the different sections, different part that we have, we would love to just ground ourselves in the topic and really understand what we're talking about today. And the book that you wrote, the overarching idea is gratitude, as far as I can see. And I think it's a word that we hear a lot nowadays, right? It's kind of like a buzzword. You gotta be grateful, you gotta have gratitude. But then, how would you define gratitude in this context?
well, I've done a lot of reading and thinking about this even since the book came out. And what I heard someone the other day say, gratitude is waiting for something good to happen. Gratefulness is recognizing that it's all around you all the time and it's your job to notice it. So I almost think if I could go back and retitle the book, I would talk about gratefulness rather than gratitude, if that definition is true. Um, I I think I do think gratitude is this idea of, and we're told all the time, what is it, attitude of gratitude and count your blessings and all this stuff. I tell you what, when my book came out and I noticed on the back, they tell you where your book has been um, categorized by the Library of Congress. And I looked and saw it said self help. And I said, what? Me? Self help? I can't help anybody. I don't know what I'm talking about. But all I could do was share my experience, which was that through the process of writing letters, I had to get into the habit of looking around for things to be grateful for because I had to write a letter at the end of every week. I had to find things to say thank you for. And we can talk about that whole process, but what occurred for me over and over and over each time I wrote a letter is I felt physically better, I felt mentally better, and over the course of the year I changed the way I looked at the world around me. I am much better able now to look at hard situations and identify what good might be coming out of that situation. And it's really, gratitude is a practice. It is about just revisiting over and over because it can be different in every moment. What's good right now? What's something that is helpful to me right now? Who's somebody who has done something kind for me today? And I think at a time in I'm in the US. It's a very difficult time to be in America. There's so many hard things, and I don't think it's limited just to the US. I read the global news. I know what's up, but I think it gets very easy to lock ourselves into this idea that everything's terrible, everything's threatening, the news is always bad. And it is if that's what you look for. But there's plenty of good stuff around you if you practice seeing it. And so for me, gratitude has to do with recognizing in the tiniest things around you the good, the positive, the loving. I was in the middle of a conference call earlier today for my day job, and my husband has the day off and he just walked in and put a coffee down for me. And I just think that something like that, to risk not being grateful for that is really to risk karmic payback. I think, you really have to, just the little things like that, you have to stop and go, boy, that's really lucky. I'm so
Yeah,
glad to be married to that guy
absolutely.
because he brought me a coffee. It was a kind thing. So
Mm,
I think it's
yeah,
just about noticing.
yeah. Sometimes it's just counting the little blessings and the little things, like you said, because a lot of the time, when we go about our days, we just forget. And I think that's the nice thing about gratitude. As much as we talk about it all the time, we actually don't practice it enough. And like you said, it is a practice. So we're definitely going to go deep into it in the interview later today. But before we do that, we really want to get to know you a little better. And I'm sure the audience would love to get to know you better and get some recommendations from you if possible. So we do have this really fun fun section we call Have You Met Nancy? So, in this section, we're going to name a couple of things and we would love to hear your recommendations on these areas. So, it's just going to be five things, and you feel free to talk a bit about the recommendation you're going to make as well. The first thing we would love to know is a book that you would recommend.
Okay, I'm so ready for this because first of all, so I do a monthly newsletter which people can sign up for on my website, daviskho.com, daviskho.com. And I always include book and music recommendations. So this is right up
Oh,
my alley.
amazing.
So the book, I know you're in Melbourne. This is written by an Australian author. It just
Yep.
came out. It's called "This Is Not a Book About Benedict Cumberbatch."
Oh,
And the author is a woman named Tabitha Carvan. And I started reading this book on a 6 hour flight and I finished it at the end of my flight. I did not take a break for 6 hours. It was fabulous. It is not a book about
wow.
Benedict Cumberbatch, although if you like him, I'm sure you'll like the book.
I
But
love
it's all about finding something to be excited about, to be passionate about,
Hmm.
and not letting go of that. And so this was, in her case, she was, when she was a young mom, she decided she really liked Benedict Cumberbatch and she was very embarrassed about it and she didn't want to talk about it. And she sort of, it's a feminist book in so many ways because she talks about how the things that are important to women often get devalued by society. And you can have a coworker who's put sports pennants all over his office and nobody asks a question. But if she puts up Benedict Cumberbatch pictures, she feels, embarrassed. So I'm doing a terrible job summarizing for you what this book is about, but it is hilarious and it
Yep.
makes you just feel it was really a joyful book. I had so much fun reading that. So that
Oh,
this is not a book about Benedict Cumberbatch by Tabitha Carvan, who is Australian.
oh, amazing recommendation. You got me really intrigued, especially because this has Benedict Cumberbatch in it. So I definitely will have to check that out.
I
Thank
think
you.
I have to say, I think he's a weird looking dude. He doesn't do it for me, but I still enjoyed that she enjoyed him. That's all I'll say.
Well, I would say he has a really fun looking side to him, which is why, like, like it's just so fun to watch him in all of the
He's a
movies,
great
especially like,
actor. Give
yeah,
him
he's
that.
great. Yeah, yeah. And also because I'm a Marvel fan. So I'm like,
Oh, there
of
you go.
course I gotta like him. So, yeah. There you go.
There you go.
Um, okay, great. So we've got the book sorted. What about a movie that you would recommend?
Everything Everywhere All at Once, which stars Michelle Yeoh.
Oh my gosh.
About oh
Yes.
my gosh, my daughter and I just went to see it last week. So it I could I that one I this I couldn't even start to summarize, but it is a woman who realizes that she's exists in multiple universes all the time and she has to save the world from evil, but she's literally like a worker at a dry cleaner. And
Mm,
it's just so imaginative and um, it was very moving. I was not I did not expect to be in tears by the end of that movie, but it was really cool and
yeah.
beautiful, and I can't summarize it. Good luck. Go see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, thank you. I've heard so much about it. Every single one of my friend just raves about this
But
movie.
did they
So,
are they able to tell you what it's about? Because I don't think I can.
well, I don't like spoilers. So I was like, okay, if it's good, I'm gonna have to see it, but do not tell me what it's about.
Yeah,
Because I just know that it's gonna be good, and I know it's about the multiverse, which is like
right.
also a
Which and
Marvel
I'm not a
related
sci-fi
thing, kind
person,
of.
so
Yeah. So
yeah,
I'm
I'm
like, okay, I'm hooked.
yeah.
Great. This one is gonna be fun. I know you have your own podcast, but would you recommend any other podcast besides your one?
I am recommending one that starts this week. It's called I Can't Imagine, and it's by
Okay.
my friend Taya Dunn Johnson. And Taya was a guest on my podcast. She came on to talk about how at age, she was in her late 40s, I think, decided to go a completely different way in her career. She is becoming a thanatologist, which is someone who studies death and not the medical
Oh.
side of death, but how we all process and support one another and sort of how we as a civilization could do better when it comes to the last part of someone's life. And she came to that
Mm,
work because she was widowed very suddenly in her
mm.
30s.
Yeah.
And the way that people stepped up for her or failed to really informed how she looks at this topic. So now she's getting a degree in the subject. So she starting a podcast this week called I Can't Imagine, which is what people said to her when her husband died, which was not particularly helpful.
Mm,
And so she wants to talk about death and how we can do better. And I love her tagline is because talking about death won't actually kill you,
Yeah.
which I think we're so scared to talk about it. But as someone I've lost both my parents in the past 5 years. They were in their 80s, and I learned so much supporting them through that. Things that I thought would be so hard were not hard at all. Other things, like yesterday was Father's Day in the US. My dad has been gone 6 years, and I was a mess all day. I didn't expect that after 6 years it would be hard again. So there's
Yeah.
just a lot to the topic, and I'm excited. She's a wonderful storyteller. So I can't imagine
Mhm.
with Taya Dunn Johnson.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for the recommendation. And you're such a great friend for giving her a shout out. And
Oh,
yeah, I think the topic is close to your heart as well. And I'm sure a lot of people would relate, especially after the pandemic. A lot of us have lost
gosh.
loved ones. So yeah, it's very timely that we get to know about this show, and very glad to hear your friends doing that.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. So the next question is, we normally ask for a recommendation or just your personal famous role model, or if not famous, your role model personally.
I don't know if she's famous to your listeners, but she's famous to me and my friends. She is a congressperson in California named Katie Porter. And what I
Okay.
love about Katie Porter, she is the first Democratic representative in a so liberal sort of progressive representative in a fairly conservative district, but she's been in Congress for a few years. And what's amazing about Katie is she has a gift of questioning people in power in such a simple, well informed, clear manner that just takes down their arguments step by step by step. And you see these, bank presidents quaking when they find out that Katie Porter and her whiteboard, because she does it all on a whiteboard. She always has her marker and she's,
Yep.
lining it out. And again, we're, in a difficult time in our country's history. We've got elections coming up, and I'm pretty involved in trying to make sure that everybody who has the right to vote knows that they should get out and use it. And I do a lot of get out the vote volunteer work. And I got a t-shirt yesterday that says Katie Porter's whiteboard energy. And that's how I'm
Oh,
going into the coming months. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to just try to be
I love that.
clear and factual and explain things and hope it helps. So,
Yeah. Wow, we've definitely not heard of her much from over here, but I would say I love the energy that she's kind of giving you, and then also the energy that you're channeling, knowing that she's making a really great impact in your, at least your local area.
well, people who are role models beget role models. So, if she inspires me to do this, and I can inspire somebody else to do it, and I
Yeah.
just think that's how you make positive change.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
again, all this positive stuff that you don't hear in the news,
Yeah.
she's doing amazing
Exactly.
work. So, very proud to
Yeah.
have her representing my state.
Yeah. And seems like there's also the gratitude that you just embedded right there as well, which we'll talk about in a second. And the final thing we want to ask you for recommendation or just to share with us is a course that you've completed that you really like.
I laughed when I saw this question because I'm like, but Lou, I'm old. I haven't taken a course in a long time.
We don't
The
assume
only
that at all.
the only thing I could point to, and it's gonna, well, I'll whatever. If it makes you laugh, all the better. I decided this year, after I ended the podcast in December, I found myself with some unaccustomed free time. And
Yep.
I decided that I would at least twice a month listen to a 1 hour lecture on some subject.
Yep.
There's a course called One Day University. You can sign
Oh,
up for, a
okay.
monthly subscription, and you can tap into all these lectures. And so I don't know. Will people see that I have a mixtape cassette on the wall? I'm a huge music fan,
I
and
can see that.
yes, and so of course I went through a lot of the catalog that had to do with musicians and music, and the last one I did was about Bruce Springsteen, which I thought I knew everything
Ah,
about him because I've read all the books and watched all the movies, and I love Bruce, so I took a class on Bruce Springsteen. There you go,
hey, that
and
is
I
a really
felt
fun
better for it.
class.
I felt better for it. So
Yeah. See, I mean, we never judge that, just because you're past the age of going to university, you're going to stop taking courses. And sometimes it can just be a fun course. We never stop learning. Sometimes just learn about, the most random stuff that makes us happy.
right, like
Yeah.
Bruce,
Yeah, exactly. Like your case, you learned about Bruce, and that's great. We're really happy to hear that,
AMA Bruce Springsteen.
Maybe that'll inspire somebody else to learn about Bruce, or maybe
Hmm.
another Bruce, you know.
There you go.
Um, great. So there goes Nancy and her recommendations. Now we've we've got to know you a little better, and hopefully the
And
audience
hopefully you're
feels
still listening and haven't
yeah.
walked away.
Yeah, hopefully the audience feels a bit closer to Nancy and her podcaster energy. And I think this is very helpful for us to actually now jump into the topic. Now we're going to talk about the serious thing that we're here to hear and we're here to talk about. I'm very excited because I have been thinking about this a lot, been struggling with this a lot. We always start the questions by going broad, because the podcast is it's about happiness. This is the overarching theme, and we really want to hear um, all the definitions, from everyone around the world, because we know that each person has a really different definition when it comes to happiness. So, Nancy, what does happiness mean to you?
It's such a hard question. I'm curious. I'd love to see the breadth of answers that you get to this, and also culturally
Yeah,
speaking, how those change. How those
definitely.
change from region to region. But I think two things are really important. Without these two conditions, I'm never happy. And one is connection with other people. I love to feel like I am, connected to friends, connected to family. When I feel isolated, I'm not happy. But as
Yeah.
long as, and it doesn't mean I have to be at a party every night. After the pandemic, I'm unable to do that anyway. My social battery went from a car size down to like a double A. But I know that when I am out with my friends or a friend and we're just talking, that sense of connection and feeling not alone in the world is a really important component of happiness. And the older I get, the other piece of it that's important is that I am doing something of service to other people, that I'm making other people happy. And what I say with this book, sometimes when we talk about happiness in relation to the Thank You Project, I tell people just worry about the gratitude. The happiness is the byproduct. You're going to get happier, but you don't have to chase that. That's going to come on its own. And I think this is the same kind of idea that, the pursuit of happiness on its own, that doesn't, to me, that doesn't feel like a way that I can get there. But I know that if I'm helping somebody else in some way, serving them, just listening to them, however that, whatever form that takes, that makes me feel better. It makes me feel like I'm here for a reason. And that makes me happy.
Yeah, I think this is the first time I've heard those two come together on the show and you're talking to the guest. And I think I absolutely agree with you because for me as well, like feeling like you're by yourself doing things that you enjoy, that's a great feeling, but that doesn't not necessarily bring happiness rather than when you actually share it with others and be with your friends and be in company. And yeah, of course, there's also that component of, we are of service to other people and we're not just in our little bubble and we're actually
Right.
making a good impact. So totally agree with you.
Well,
And
and don't
also,
get me wrong, Lou,
yeah,
like, I'm all about last week I sat on the couch one day, everybody was out of the house and I watched TV, but I watched the AHA documentary all by myself and I was so happy because I was alone.
yeah,
So it's not
yeah,
like constant,
yeah,
but
of course,
it that is kind of a fast track is when I'm with other
yeah,
people. So
yeah, yeah, of course. I agree with you because
shout out to the couch potatoes who need that alone
yeah,
time. Like that's cool too.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think it's different as well. I don't know if you're an extrovert and introvert. Like I identify myself as an introvert, but I do enjoy quality time with friends. And that does make me happy. Although I do recharge by being by myself. So there you go. It's like two different aspects, I would say.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Well, I used to think I was an extrovert. Then the pandemic happened, and I have adult children, and they both moved home. And then my husband's. I've worked from home for 20 years. I've got, I've always done that basically. And all of a sudden, it was like an office park. There was someone working at every surface in the house, and
Mm,
I was, of course, really grateful that we had a house big enough that everybody could do their thing here. And it was, we came through the pandemic relatively unscathed.
yeah.
But man, when they all went back again, I was like, "Oh god, that was too much company every single day." It turns out I like being alone for 8 hours every day, and then I'm
Yeah.
extroverted because 'cause I'm rested
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, yeah. I think you probably an ambivert, somewhere in
Oh, sure.
between. Yeah, we've heard that quite a bit as well. So there's your definition of happiness. I definitely agree with that. I resonate with that quite a bit. And I think another thing that we always wonder, when it comes to happiness, yes, we all have our personal definition, and we also have our own observation as well when we, interact with other people in the world. When you interact with people and when you observe people, what do you think to be some of the main misconceptions when it comes to happiness? Like, what do people get wrong?
I think people get wrong that you're supposed to be happy all the time. I think it's a huge misconception. I think it's particularly hard for young people
Yeah.
because you're not, I mean, and this was even before the pandemic. Life is made up of peaks and valleys, and your job is to coast through them as gently with yourself as you can. And
Yeah.
I think that's what growing up is. I think growing up is realizing you cannot be happy all the time, and that doesn't mean you'll never be happy. It just means you have to readjust your perspective. And I've written a lot and talked a lot about, and I think it's the same term for Australia. I know you've got listeners around the globe, so forgive me if I don't know the right term in your country, but here it's Generation X. So it's people who were born between 1965 and 1980 ish on both ends.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've always said is this generation in the US, everybody called us slackers. You're cynical, the generational traits were that we were kind of
Mm.
negative people. And it to me, happiness is the difference between expectations and reality, right? If you think
Yeah.
everything's going to be great all the time and then it's not, you can
Yeah.
be really disappointed. But our generation never thought things were going to be great. We were kind of brought up, we had really high divorce rates amongst our parents. We had terrible job markets every time we were getting out of high school and college. And um, it to me, Gen X is interesting because we were called cynical. Well, maybe it's just realistic. And
Mm.
so I feel like I know a lot of very happy Gen Xers because maybe we never got our hopes up so high that middle age was going to be great anyway. So we get here and we're like, yeah, it's not that bad. It's fine. Like I can deal with this.
Yeah.
So I think that is part of why I feel that this misconception is so damaging because um, if you're just fed a line all the time that things, everything's going to be great. If you just do the right things, you'll be happy. Even if you do the right things, you're going to have hard times. Good people can have terrible things happen to them. And the question is, how do you get through those difficult times? It's the people around you who support you. It's your own resilience, and it's your faith in the fact that things will get better again.
Yeah. I think that's a definitely different perspective, because we have, people from old generations here on the show, I would say. And even though I'm not from your generation, my parents are. And, I think for us, it's maybe a similar thing where, when I was younger, I thought, oh, you know what, my parents are pretty cynical, but then now I agree with you. Maybe they're just realistic because they've gone life much longer than I have. They've done this for much longer. They know what's what. And I think for us, I agree, our generation, I don't know if I'm speaking for everyone, but for me, like I've observed in my group of friends, especially when we were much younger, and a lot of people were saying, you know what, like I'm not happy all the time and this is not great, like I'm feeling low again. Well, I think for me, I've learned to embrace that low as well because
Hmm.
like you treasure the highs much more, and that contributes to your overall happiness. It's not like something that you experience every single moment, but it's more like a state of mind, I would say. Like you still feel it there even in your lowest moment.
Yeah, and I think going through those low moments, going through those challenges, that's what makes us interesting, empathetic people, right?
Exactly.
Because if you
Totally agree.
encounter some terrible stuff in your life and then someone who is a friend goes through something bad, you can say to them, let me talk this through with you because I went through that and it wasn't permanent and here I am. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the stuff that makes us interesting, um soulful people is
Yeah.
that hard time. But you don't want to know that when you're young, and I don't, I didn't want to know that, but I do
Yeah.
think that's what growing up is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
figuring that out.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think that's the beauty of growing up, like the growing pains. You just
Mhm.
embrace the lows and the highs equally because
Right.
you learn from both of them and you grow. And I think that you mentioned resilience, and I think yes, that definitely makes us more resilient, tougher, and can deal with anything that comes our way later in life. Because otherwise, if everything's great all the time and you qualify that as happy, then there will be a certain point where things go south.
Right.
Life is like that, right? We've always known. So that is happiness. Those are some of the misconceptions. We've addressed some of those, and now we go a bit closer to home. We're talking about your book and your work here, and I feel like when you started writing your book, there's got to be something that inspired it, and I'm sure because the overarching theme is happiness and um, gratitude today. I would love to venture into this, section where we actually talk about the relationship between gratitude and happiness, in your opinion, and perhaps that relates to how you started writing the book. I'm very curious.
Well, if I can start with, yeah, let me give a little background, if I may, about how
Yeah,
the letters came about, because of
yeah,
course that led to the book. But the year I was turning 50, I decided, big benchmark birthday. I want to do something to set it off from every other birthday that I've celebrated. And everything really was going pretty well for me. It was one of those high points in life where my parents were doing well. My kids were okay. My husband and I had been married 25 years at that point. And I just thought, I'm really fortunate. I am privileged in so many ways, and I would not be where I am had it not been for the help of a lot of different people along the way. So,
yep,
what I will do for my birthday year is write one letter every week to someone who has helped, shaped, or inspired me. And that was it. My rule was, one letter a week, one page letter. And I thought I'll do 50 letters because it's a 50th birthday, and that's that. And if so I sat down and made a list of family, close friends, and I got to about 20 people, 25 people. And I thought, I don't even know 50 people. I don't know how I'm going to write 50 letters, but I'll worry about that later.
yeah,
So I started writing these letters, and each time I wrote one, I experienced this like very predictable physical reaction where I felt calmer and my
mm,
breathing would like mellow out and just I would just feel so centered at the end of writing my letter. And that was before I mailed it. That was before I got anybody's reaction to it. And it was
yeah,
fascinating to me because every week it was the same thing. So as time went on, and we can talk, you mentioned how you learn through negative experience and how you learn from the hard times. The project grew beyond anything I'd ever imagined because, first of all, it went from being something that I was doing to celebrate all my good fortune to being something that helped me navigate a very difficult year.
mm,
6 months into writing my letters, my dad passed away suddenly.
mm,
And I was in grief and I was really struggling. And all of a sudden, writing those letters every week became the way that I reminded myself that I was not alone in my grief, that I had people around me helping me and lifting me up. And so I saw both sides of the benefits of writing the letters. The other thing that happened is that as time went on, and I can talk about the science roots of this because I researched them for the book, but as time went on and I wrote more of the letters, I started getting much more creative and expansive, thinking about who I was grateful for.
yeah,
And there started to be letters to people I never would have thought at the beginning of the year that I was going to write letters to. So, it was a life changing, completely unplanned experiment. I really
yeah,
didn't see any of this coming. I just thought, oh, I'm going to write these thank you letters. So I
yeah,
got through the end of my letters, my 50 letters, and that was it. That was the end of that's what I had set out to do. And that was that. And I kept getting asked by people, I heard you wrote these letters for your 50th birthday. How did you do it? Who did you write to? What did you put in the letters? How'd you just, and I would be like, well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but here, let me answer those questions. And then it happened a second. And by the time it happened a third time, I thought, well, I could certainly write down what I did. And that was all I
yeah,
intended to do. Just make it easy for other people to do this. And that was what became the book. So the book was not anything I had imagined doing, but after more and more people kept asking me about it, and I felt then, I feel now so strongly that this practice is simple but so powerful. And I wrote it in a way that I hope that people who never put pen to paper and write a single letter will still read it and have an opportunity to reflect on those in their lives for whom they're grateful.
Yeah.
So that's the book. I wrote the book in 2018. It came out in 2019, and I still, it still works. I know the gratitude letters still work, and I'm still
Yeah.
hearing from readers who are doing their own gratitude projects and telling me about them, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think when we were doing our research into like different areas, especially gratitude, and we found out about your book, we were like, "Hallelujah, this is it!" Like this is amazing. And I, when I saw it as well, I was like, "Why have I not heard about this before?" And I'm just so glad that I get to talk to you today. And I think that is the context to how this came about for you. But you also mentioned the science of it, right? So I'm sure you navigated through a really tough year through writing these letters. I wouldn't say that you got happier because it was definitely a really tough time for you and your family. But I would say it definitely has a positive impact on your level of happiness during that period, based on what I've heard from you so far. Because you could manage it, you find things to be grateful for. You're not alone. So when you look into the science of it, how does gratitude actually make you happier?
Well, when I got the book deal from Running Press, I said, I want to include the brain science in the book because I want to make sure that nobody says, well, this worked for her, but it's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
She's not a scientist. What does she know? So I wanted to make
Yeah.
sure that everything I said was backed up. And also
Yeah.
I was really curious. I was like, why am I different now from writing these letters? So we have down the road at UC Berkeley, we've got the Greater Good Science Center, which studies the positive psychology. There's UC Davis has a great center. There's a lot of wonderful research being done into the field of positive emotions.
Yeah.
And what I learned is that gratitude and happiness are so tightly coupled. And I included as much of it as I could in the book. But essentially, what happens is we're all born with positive and negative recall bias. That's sort of the starting point. So, negative recall bias is what cues you to look for dangerous things in the environment around you. It tells you to get out of the way of a speeding car. It tells you to remember to put your mask on before you go into a coughing crowd. And it tells you to protect yourself. And that's important. Everybody needs that. Otherwise, you'd be doing reckless things all the time. But the problem is getting stuck there and just looking at the world every day through a lens of what's dangerous, what's bad, how am I going to be attacked today? And what scientists learned is that the way to mitigate that is not to say, oh, I shouldn't be negative. Oh, I shouldn't do that anymore. It's not, that doesn't work. What works is increasing your positive recall bias, strengthening your positive recall bias. So it's just the inverse. It's the tendency we have to look for positive things around us. And by proactively looking for positive things every day, you are actually rewiring your brain to make sort of superhighways to that activity. So
Yeah.
it's really like a muscle. The more you look for positive things, the more efficient your brain becomes at finding positive things. So every time I wrote a letter, my goal was to be very specific. I wanted to say, this is something you taught me. This is a lesson that I remember you sharing with me. You probably don't remember the time you helped me, but this is why that made a difference.
Yeah.
And so all week long, getting ready to write my letters, I would just have to think about every interaction I had with that person. Why, when I went to school with them, how do it, like, what was the time I traveled with them? And I would just marinate in these really positive memories and associations of someone in my life. And by the time it was time to write the letter, I was always bursting. I was like, oh, I can't wait to write this all down.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to me, I was just strengthening that positive recall bias because I was practicing. I was just filtering through all my memories and picking out the good stuff. And
Yeah.
so the more you do that, the more efficient your brain gets at that. And that's what leads to a happier outlook because you're not in a crouch position all the time waiting to get whacked. You're looking for, hey, there's somebody who's, offering me a ride in their car to get away from whatever that threat is. Like, that's a better thing to think
Yeah.
about. So,
Yeah.
and there's research that shows that a deliberate expression of gratitude leads to improved sleep, which I think makes us all happier when we sleep better, lowered blood pressure, people with asthma can have better control of their asthma. All the science seems to say that we work optimally from a place of gratitude. We're meant to be
Yeah.
grateful because every system works better as a result.
That's amazing how you said we are meant to be grateful. Like, like that from the science of it, that is definitely something that people should hear more about, I suppose, because again, we've talked about gratitude quite a bit in the past few years, especially with the rise of like meditation, mindfulness, gratitude. All of these things have been mentioned a lot of time, but now that we actually know the science that back it up, we know that it actually helps you thrive. And
Hmm.
it's not just a level of happiness, but it helps in other aspects of life as well. And I think the most interesting thing that I was picking up from when you were talking about the process of writing the letters and also the science that you picked up after having written the letters is I think there are different kinds of utilizing gratitude for our benefit. One, I know that some people actually just journal it out or just
Hmm.
think about it or just talk about it with friends. But in your case, you actually express it to the person that you're grateful to for something that they did for you. And I haven't read the book, but I could imagine, where you're going with this, like all of the people that have helped you, even if it's just a little thing that they probably don't remember. Do you think it's better for us in terms of our level of happiness to actually express it, or counting our blessing is already enough to help us feel happier?
Well, I love the practices you're talking about. Journaling. The one that I do a lot is three good things. So when I feel myself getting anxious or starting to feel very negative, I just stop and say, "Okay, pick out three good things in the room right now." And I know that by doing that, I'm slowing my heart rate. I'm recentering myself. So I would never tell anybody to not do those things. This is all
Mm,
additive, pick and choose.
yeah.
What I like about gratitude letters is that it's a twofer,
Mm,
because even though you're writing to the other person, it is actually about you.
yeah.
It is all about ways, reminding yourself ways you've been supported.
Yeah.
But then the other person gets a letter that says, "You matter to me so much because you've done X, Y, and Z for me. I'm so grateful for you. You're awesome." Who doesn't want a letter like that? And that was even before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, every time one of these letters goes out, you're making someone else happier. It's such a lovely surprise. And
Yeah.
um, we there's a section in the book where I talk about letters that you write and don't send.
Mm,
Because the more I thought about helped, shaped, inspired, I was like, oh, there's people who have done that for me who I'm not in touch with and I don't want to be in touch with. The exes and the terrible bosses who taught me important lessons.
yeah.
But all those good feelings I mentioned, the feeling centered and the calming and all of that, that came from writing the letters, not from the reaction. The reactions were
Right.
great. When I got a nice reaction, I loved that, but
Yeah.
I didn't need it. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I could write the letters and not send them
Mm,
and express my gratitude for the things that were positive in that relationship. Even if it ended
yeah.
on a bad note, there were still positive things in there. And
Yeah.
so it's a powerful way to reframe parts of your life that you might have cast in a negative light that doesn't need to stay in a negative light. You
Mm,
learned something from that experience, you've moved on. Um, so I totally get it when people say I want to write the letters and I don't want to send them. But
yeah.
there's research that I include in the book that talks about the fact that people tend to underestimate how awkward it will be to give someone, or I'm sorry, they overestimate how awkward it will feel to give someone a gratitude letter, and they underestimate how happy the other person will feel as a result.
Right.
So basically, they get nervous. They're like, I don't want to give that guy a letter because what if he reads it and says, "Who's this? I don't even, I changed your life. I don't even know who you are." But
yeah.
the fact is that most people are so, so surprised in a beautiful way and happy to receive a letter like that.
Yeah.
So that's why I like it, because I think, two people can benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that because I remember I've never done such a project like yours before, but I do remember there was a time that I was kind of thinking about like, oh, like, the people that have led me to where I was, because I was at a period and a place in my life where I was really just happy with everything and really grateful for everything, and I thought, you know what, like these people, even though they're not in my life right now, I really want to let them know. And I felt the same thing actually. I was like, I'm so scared. Like, We're not even
Mhm.
talking anymore. How are they going to feel if I send them a message? It's just, like the digital age. I'm just going to, write a message up and send it to them. It's not like I'm handwriting the letter or anything like that. But still, I was still kind of like, oh, I'm not sure about this. I don't know if I can do it. Like I'm so scared. What are they going to think of me? All that sort of stuff. And then I decided that, you know what? I'm just going to send it to them anyway. And I agree with you. Well, you definitely overestimate,
Right.
like the feeling because it's not that bad when like it's actually great to send it, and also you underestimate how you're both gonna feel. And we ended up having really nice conversations. I had conversations with people that I didn't talk to for a while, and I think that is really really great. Even though it was not like a 50 letter project like yours, just a couple of people in my life, but I feel like it definitely was a reminder that yes, I have tried this before as well, and I think it works. And once we actually um, keep the scientific benefit in mind, we actually know that it is helpful. And you're right, it helps two people, not just one. So
Right.
it helps us and it helps the other person as well. So
Right.
I think is the message is just for everyone and anyone who's not done this before, or who's just willing or wishing to have a little bit of a happier day or happier week. This is something that they can try.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
I say throughout the book, there are no thank you note police. So I offered up my experience in the
Yeah.
spirit of here's one way to do it. And I get pretty specific in case anybody wants to follow right along. But I also interviewed a few other people who had done similar projects just to show that there's a range of ways to do it. And any way you are expressing gratitude to somebody else is a positive way to do it. So
Yeah.
I got a
Absolutely.
letter the other day from a reader who told me that every Thanksgiving or every November, which is when we celebrate Thanksgiving in the US, she uses the 30 days of November to write 30 letters every year, which I thought
Yeah.
was beautiful. What a wonderful way to make that holiday really meaningful.
Yeah. That is a great idea. Like there again, there's so many ways we can do
Hmm.
this. And yeah, people get so creative, right? This is how you show and utilize your creativity as well.
Right.
I think you mentioned something really interesting earlier that was mentioned earlier in the episode. We were talking about how when you started writing it, you mentioned that, well, I want to write 50 letters, but I don't actually know 50 people.
Hmm.
So that's one of the challenges when you started this personal project of yours. I'm sure there would be some other challenges as well. So could you tell us a little more about some of the challenges you encountered?
Well, let me just to cap that off. Not knowing the 25 people, what happened is, I got through that number, and my positive recall bias had gotten so much stronger that that was when I started writing. That was the ex boyfriend letters and those, and then I thought,
Okay.
okay, if I'm writing letters that aren't going to be opened or that aren't going to be read by anyone but me,
Yeah.
I don't have to write to just people. So
Mm.
I wrote to the cities that I've lived in that have shaped
Oh,
me because I've moved a few times and I
wow.
carry a
Yeah.
piece of each of those places with me. So I wrote to the city of Oakland where I live, my hometown of Rochester, New York. And then I thought, well, I love Jane Austen. I'm a big fan
Mm.
of Jane Austen, and she's been dead for 200 years, but I'm still going to write her a thank you letter. So by the end, I was just writing to all kinds of the
Yeah.
live music industry because I love to go see concerts, and it
Oh,
was really
love that.
freeing, and also just a good reminder that we are surrounded by things that we take a little piece with us that help
Yeah.
make us who we are.
Yeah.
And even if nobody's ever going to read the letter, it doesn't matter because the joy comes from writing down, this is what I learned, this is how I'm different, this is what I love so much about live music or Jane Austen or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
there was that got easier as time went on. you know I think that, the biggest difficulty that I encountered was that my dad died halfway
Yeah.
through the project, and I was unable to do much for a little while. I had to take a step back. So it took me a year and a few months to actually finish the 50 letters. But I had said to myself, I wasn't beating myself up. I mean,
Yeah.
grieving a parent has its own timeline. So that was the hardest thing, just getting back in the saddle, I guess. But what was a little bit funny is that I wrote to a lot of my girlfriends, my close friends here in Oakland, and some of the husbands were like, Nance, where's my letter? And so that was a little awkward. A couple of those
That
guys got
was.
letters on round 2, but, for the most part, I was like, "You know what? If you're asking me for a letter, you're not on my list." So,
Oh, that must have been a bit awkward, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I said in the book, I
Right.
say I don't recommend writing a book about it because now and even, like,
Everyone's
the
asking.
ex-boyfriends all know that there are letters because 'cause they've read the book, so,
Oh, that's
I
hilarious.
made it awkward
Yeah.
for myself, I really
Yeah.
did.
No, but the benefit is, still overwhelming to this day. I think it's such a great project, and yeah, I'm sure you're still benefiting from it. And you mentioned round 2. Does that mean that you've done another round of letter after writing the book?
I did. I continue to do it because when I had stopped, when I got to my
Yeah.
50 letters, and then in doing the research for the book about the science, I was like, "Why'd you stop, dummy?" Because there's obviously so many benefits, which I'd experienced personally. I just kind of let
Yeah.
it go. So I still do. And in fact, I was just thinking of somebody who I owe a letter to, and
Yeah.
it's nice. And a couple of my letters are now, 2017. My letters are 5 years old,
Mm.
and the last 2 years, I don't know about you guys, but I had people help me get through the pandemic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have made it through without them. And
Yeah.
so I may go back and do a second round for some of the people who got letters the first time. Like my friend who showed up with the 12 pack of toilet paper when we were down to one roll, there was some scary times there.
Yep, yep, definitely. Oh, I would definitely imagine the level of gratitude is like through the roof in that
Yes,
period. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Things could
That's
have gotten real
amazing.
dark real fast.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, what a time, right? So, I think you mentioned that there are letters that you send, there are letters that you didn't send, but for the ones that you actually sent, what happened? What are some of the reactions that you got?
Well, my dad's was the best. My dad called me and told me he had framed it and hung it over his desk. So the opening scene of the book is me sitting at that desk writing his eulogy, looking at the letter and how much, my dad had sat there with that letter in front of him for 6 months before he died.
Mhm.
And I felt such a profound sense of relief that my dad
Mm,
knew what I thought of him and that I
yeah,
had expressed myself fully. Not only that expressed myself, but that he had time to kind of sit with that.
yeah.
And so that was huge. I don't mention my mom had dementia already at that point, so she couldn't really respond to it, but she did love the letter. And other people sometimes. So my dad was definitely like the far end of over the top reaction. People were really sweet. I'd get a hug, I'd get a text, I got a couple letters back.
Mm,
And it meant a lot to me to know that, that some people put it into the bedside table or into their purse to reread. And I was really glad I'd sent the letters. So,
yeah. Yeah, I think like when you told us about, the fact that your dad has the letter 6 months before he died, so he had 6 months to actually, get showered in your love and
mhm,
your gratitude. I think
mhm.
that's really beautiful, and I'm also really really glad that it happened because it definitely is something that we need to be reminded, not just for your project or people wishing to start a gratitude project, but just for everyone, right? You never know how much time you have with your parents.
Ex or
um
anybody.
yeah,
It's been a global pandemic. You don't
yeah,
know,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I really
yeah,
tell people to get going, get
yeah,
started, write a letter.
exactly, exactly. And so I think normally, we normally go about the podcast with sort of the interview with all the scientific insights and the questions. But because today we've talked about your book so much, that the next part about the practice, it's probably just going to be a repeat of what we've already talked about. But maybe we can recap it for the listeners, because I think that the practice here is really just one letter of gratitude per week. That's what you did over that
Well,
process.
so I broke it down into 3 steps. I call it see, say, and savor.
Perfect.
So you don't have to do this every week. You can do it on whatever time scale this works for you, but the 3 steps are see, and that's what I talked about. Just spend some time thinking about the person you're going to write to. What have they taught you? What's
Yeah.
the time they helped you? What's a wonderful memory that you have together? And just allow yourself time to think about that. And one piece of research that I include in the book talked about the fact that people who wrote a gratitude letter and delivered it in person had measurably higher happiness levels for a full month after they did it. So I
Wow.
might have gone too fast. I should have slowed
Yeah.
down and just done one a month, but I liked my weekly
Mm.
pace. So the C part, just take your
Yeah.
time and let yourself really marinate in those good memories. The
Right.
second part is say, and that's
Yep.
writing the letter. And I get questions a lot from people who say, can I just text it? Can I just email it? I
Mm.
am a fan of the written letter, the hard copy letter. And just so you know, I typed mine. I'm a terrible, my handwriting's awful anymore. But I love when people handwrite it, all
Yeah.
praise. But
Yeah.
I had to type mine. And the reason I think it's really important to put it in the mail or hand it over to the person is that we so rarely get mail that isn't a bill. We
Yes.
so rarely get anything at all to look at in writing that isn't digital.
Yeah.
And if you're having a bad day and you can pull out a piece of paper that reminds you that you are loved and appreciated and someone's
Yeah.
grateful for you, that stands out in a digital world. That
Yeah.
analog
Absolutely.
communication makes a difference. So that's the say part. And in the book, I include an outline for how you can. I mean, I use the same format over and over because people were not reading each other's letters. So they didn't know if I was plagiarizing. Um, just the intro was
Yeah.
pretty much the same. And then the third part is savor.
Yeah.
And what I kept a copy of every letter I wrote. And that was among the most important things that I did in this project because it's enabled me over the years to go back and reread these letters that summarize the good people in my life. And so throughout this book, I say, oh, there's no thank you, no please, do what you want. This one I don't back down on. Make a copy of every letter you write. If it's putting it on a copy machine, if it's handwritten. But
Yeah.
the ability to go back and look at a pile of letters of people who have loved you enough to support you, it's very powerful if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling, if you've got the existential angst that's in ready supply in 2022. So that's the savor part is giving yourself the ability to go back and reread what you've written.
Yeah. That's amazing. I think that's a great tip. And I feel like, normally we ask for three benefits, but you've listed plenty already from see, say, and savor. And,
Mhm.
like we should all start doing that, even if it's not like letters we're going to send, but perhaps, whenever we can make the time. And by the way, how often do you think we should do this?
Well, like I said, whatever rate will allow you to keep going.
Yeah.
That's all I care about is that you write
Yeah.
one letter, then the next letter, then the next letter. And if
Yeah.
once a month is enough, then once a month. There's a woman in my book who wrote 100 letters in 100 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
that seemed like a lot to me, but it was perfect for her. And she loved that
Yeah.
she did it that way. So you get
Yeah.
to pick.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very customizable project,
Hmm.
isn't it? Yeah,
For
amazing.
sure.
Um, so we've already talked about heaps of the benefits, and science backs this up. We've talked about some of the challenges when you went about doing this project for yourself. Do you foresee anything else? What are some of the other challenges that you think people might encounter when they start doing this?
I'm not going to say there's any challenges because I want you to do it. I don't, it's not that hard. It's writing a letter.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't find a stamp. That's a challenge, I suppose. But I don't, it's just not that hard.
Yeah, I think starting is just the hardest sometimes. Like,
Well, I
they're like,
do say
"Oh,
to
yeah,
people,
just wait."
yeah, I mean, people
Yeah.
sometimes say, well, if I'm in a talking to an audience, they'll say, well, I've got this sister in law who I love, but she did this to me once. And I don't know. And I say, don't start with her. Start with the people who you're really excited to write to. Because with each one that you write, you're going to get better and better at figuring out what it is you're thankful for. And you don't have to thank someone for every single aspect of who they are.
Yeah.
You thank them for the things that you're grateful for. I mean, it's selective. You get to write what you're going to write. But I do think starting with the easy ones first is it takes away an obstacle to getting started because
Yeah.
you should feel excited to write these letters. You're doing it for yourself.
I think it's still like I have to say, some people find it really hard to write. I actually like when I found out about this, I found it to be very interesting because writing comes really easily to me. I journal every day, and like I write letters to friends. But some people actually tell me like they don't know what to write. Sometimes they're like, "Oh, you know what? Like I don't know. Like I just pick up the pen or like maybe start a document, but it's just blank. Like I don't even know how to start." And I find
Well,
that the starting might be the hardest bit for most people.
so like I said, if you read the book there's some very practical suggestions. I started every single letter with something along the lines of I'm turning 50 this year and I'm thinking of all the people who were
Yeah.
important to me in my
Right.
life and you are one of them. Boom, your
Yeah.
first paragraph's already done and you're
Yeah.
just going to use that same thing for every
Yeah.
paragraph and
Yeah.
then and there's writing prompts in the book as well. So I do
Mm.
think that buying the
Oh,
book will
that's
be a
great.
good first step
Yes.
because
That
it'll
is
give you
definitely a great step. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it can be made easier, but I have had people say, "Well, you're a writer, so it comes easily to you." But the fact is, your friends want to hear from you in your voice. They're
Mm.
friends with you. They're not friends with me. They
Yeah.
want to hear from you. And so what I write to my friends is in line with the way they experience me in the world. And what
Mm.
you write to your friends is going to be the same thing. So,
Yeah.
no one's expecting who's going to crumple up a letter with a
Yeah.
misspelling because, a gratitude like, oh, it's a great letter, but they used the wrong form of there. So, boop, throwing it out. That's not going to happen.
No apostrophe. Out.
Exactly. I'm done. That
Yeah.
gratitude letter stinks.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I think we sometimes we just overthink things and overcomplicate the process.
For sure.
So just getting started, like, and I think what you really meant there, I think is just to find your why. Why are you writing these letters? You can start from there and just tell the people because they would love to know. And I think another thing that I'm curious about is it sounds to me like you're still writing letters to this day.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what do you couple it with? Because sometimes when we stack habits and practice, it makes it more consistent. You stack it with something else, you couple it with something else to make it, last longer or have a greater impact, especially on your level of happiness.
I mean, I think the only thing I could point to as something that I stack in terms of gratitude would be the 3 good things,
Yeah,
just because
that's great.
that's just a ingrained habit now. It wasn't when I was writing my letters, it became one as I was doing research for the book.
Yeah.
But I stick with my regular format for the letters. They were pretty powerful the first time around, so
Yeah.
I'm not gonna mess with it, but,
Yeah.
I do just try to stop and especially when I'm feeling anxious, when I'm feeling like my heart is racing or anything like that, my shoulders are getting tight. I know that expressing gratitude releases all of that. It's science. It's not magic, it's science. So
Yeah.
I know to do that.
Yeah, that is amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing about your book, the science behind it, having some good laughs with me about the topic. This is really great. I'm definitely going to have to pick up your book. I think it takes a while for it to be shipped to Australia because I
I think
checked
it's
it out
available in
the other day.
Australia.
Oh,
No,
really?
yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I've
I found
readers there.
like I tried to find it the other day. And it's like a couple of weeks to ship, but I'm
Oh,
definitely going to get it.
well, it's also available in audio. I read the book so if you
Oh,
have an audio book access, you can
yeah,
hear me
great.
read in it. And the one thing I'll
Yeah.
mention, this is one thing that I had a lot of fun doing because I am kind of a music person. There's a mixtape for every chapter. So
Oh,
Gen
that's
X
great.
mixtape, so every
Oh,
chapter
I love
includes
that.
um, a
Yeah.
song list that I think goes with the themes. So
Oh, hey, that's a really great idea. I'm excited to grab my copy, and I'll
great.
let you know how I go. I'm definitely gonna start writing the letters because I feel like this year I really need that. Like I need that practice to like really ground me, and because I'm in a transition period in my life. I'm like,
It's a
that's gonna be
perfect
very
time to do
helpful.
it.
Exactly.
Perfect time to do it.
All right, so we have covered, all the scientific benefits, all the theories behind it, your book. We've also covered the practice, which is really great. And finally, before we let you go, we've got a couple of questions from our audience who's really keen to find out more about yourself, the practice of gratitude and everything related to the topic we're talking about today. So the first question is, will it be okay if we write the letter with the intention of us being happy instead of sincerely want to thank the person?
Well, first of all, I'm not the boss of you, so you can do whatever you like. I mean, believe me, if you want to write it because you want to be happy, go for it. I just find that I mean, I don't know how you would do that. What would make you happy? Maybe what would make you happy is thinking about how the person was helpful to you. I just feel like gratitude is a precondition to the happiness. I'd love to hear how you do it.
Yeah.
And I
This is
mean,
a great.
honestly, I
Yeah.
do whatever works for you. That's what I
Yeah.
think. But I do
Yeah.
think that gratitude has a power to build resilience in a way that happiness may not. And I'm not enough of an expert on happiness to know that. But I do know that gratitude builds resilience. And when you have hard times, gratitude is the thing that's going to get you back to the happier times
Yeah.
in one piece.
Yeah. Great.
How's that for an answer?
I think it was very interesting of a question, to be honest, because I was like, oh, so like we're reverse engineering how we're doing this. This is
Yeah, and maybe
very,
that
yeah,
works.
yeah,
I haven't done
yeah,
it that way, so I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess we'll only know, we won't know until we've tried. So,
Right.
for that to let listener, they can try and,
There's
find
a
out how that
contact form
works.
on my website at daviskho.com. Send me a note and let me know how it
Oh,
goes. I wanna
yeah. There
hear.
you go.
I
There you go.
really love when people do this and let me know how it manifested for them because
Yeah.
it's gone so far beyond what I did, and
Mm,
I feel really lucky every time I get
yeah.
any feedback from a reader who says, "Well, I did it this way," and I'm like, "That is
Yeah.
so cool." So,
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I would love to hear what your listeners are doing too. I mean, like what the people that are doing, from the same process that you did from your book and get the inspiration. That would be a
well,
wild journey.
I just heard one that gave me goosebumps, and I probably will again. But
Yeah.
I was invited to speak at a book club of which I
Mhm.
love to do. I can do that by Zoom if people are listening and want to do that. But
Yay.
this was a group of women who had met when their kids were in elementary school, and now the kids are all in their 30s. So these women were in their 60s and
Oh,
early
wow.
70s
Yeah.
and had known each other for decades. And one of them mentioned, while I was there at the book club, that her ex husband had passed away and the ladies all knew him and I was sort of privileged to sit there and listen to them talk about this man who had co-parented with the woman who was in the book club, and it was a kind of a somber beautiful thing that just
Yeah.
her processing this. And one of the women, the one who invited me to the book club in the first place, let me know that she that this woman had ended up writing a thank you letter to her deceased husband, and she sent it to the members of the book club so they could read it with her
Mm.
because she felt that that was a nice way to memorialize him, and they all knew him, and it was a way for her to say, obviously the marriage hadn't lasted forever, but they had co-parented a child together and they had some happy memories. And I thought, what a beautiful tribute to that person, and also a way for her community to know more of her story and to be able to hold her up. So I thought that
Yeah.
was a really cool way for it to take
Yeah.
form
Yeah.
differently from anything I would have imagined when I wrote the book.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad to hear. The final question we have for today is I, I think this is something probably similar to what I touched on before, but just to really clarify this question, how does it differ to us when we write it down versus when we simply think about what we're grateful for?
Well, it gives you the ability to go back and reread what you've written. There's a permanency to it. I also
Mm,
think when we write, we edit. We can't include every single thought, we can't include every single memory. And
yeah,
so it necessarily forces us to think about what was the most important, what was the most helpful. And
yeah,
to me, that was very clarifying. I felt like as a result of my letters, I really took stock of the people in my life and got better at knowing, okay, when I have this kind of problem, this is the friend who helps me the most with that. And if I have
yeah,
that kind of problem, I would never go to her, but I'd go to this other person.
yeah,
And it was just a way to take inventory and memorialize it in a way. By writing it down, you really are having to focus on the most important aspects. So I love. I think thinking about it is important. It's a necessary first step in writing the letters, but actually putting pen on paper gives it a significance and a permanence that I think is meaningful.
that's so great to hear. I think I couldn't agree more with you because when I saw the question, I was thinking, what an interesting question. Yes, I mean, still gratitude when you think about it, right? But then
Mhm.
when you actually process your thoughts and like you said, take stock of your relationships, the people that matter to you, and what exactly you are grateful for, because again, you can only write about so much. I think it's a great start for us to start. maybe just capturing the beauty of our lives.
Mhm.
If anyone wishes to try this, I think it's a really nice way to capture the areas of your life that you're grateful for, and that's going to go with you forever. And like you said, you even go back to the same person and write the second round of letter, right? Because like your
Mhm.
relationships keep evolving. So I
Right.
think it's a really nice way to capture how it has evolved as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Great. Yeah. Well, I'm sure our listeners will probably reach out to you. Some will definitely try the practice
I
of
hope you do.
writing these letters. I'm going to be one of those. I'll let you know how I go. You'll definitely hear from me. Thank you so
Great.
much for joining us today. We're really just so grateful. Embedding the gratitude here. Really, really grateful. You might get a letter from me as well. Grateful that we're getting to chat, and grateful that you're making time out of your day, especially because it's evening there.
Yeah, I gotta go cook some dinner. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've been
yeah, yeah,
Thank you so
awesome.
much for the chance to talk about this, and I just encourage everyone to really think about giving it a try, just one letter, and then see how that makes you feel, and then write the next one after that.
Yeah,
So, baby steps, but it's an important, powerful way to get through when you're having good times and when you're not having so good, when times are not as good. So, thank
yeah,
you for the chance to talk about it. I appreciate it.
yeah. Thank you for coming on, and go enjoy your dinner.
Thanks.
All right. You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.